Okay, we've got a good number of people joining in, so I'm pleased to be here to present this topic on building supply chain agility and resilience. This is the first of a four-part series of webinars we'll be running over the coming weeks to try to shed some light on a topic that's being really bandied about quite a bit in the marketplace. A lot of people talking about the need for greater agility and resilience. We'll talk about that and some observations about how we can actually move forward in that arena. From an agenda standpoint, what I want to do today is really just talk about a few key aspects of this topic. One is the market realities. You know, what is the environment that we're facing from a supply chain standpoint? How are we able to combat and deal with those realities, and where there are opportunities to improve as we go forward? And out of that, I think will come a very clear call to action for the need for agility and resilience in our supply chains. We've all seen quite a bit over the past few years, especially with the pandemic, of some of the challenges that have emerged. Even before that time, people were talking about a concept called VUCA conditions: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and how those were having serious impacts on supply chains around the world. So we'll just wade through that a little bit just to make sure we've got a good baseline and level set. And then we'll look at if that is what we really want to pursue, meaning agility and resilience, how are we actually going to do that? What would the characteristics of an agile and resilient supply chain be, so that we can kind of get a gauge on whether we're making progress towards that environment? And then we'll go through some concepts around material planning, production scheduling, S&OP, and other aspects of supply chain management, and try to highlight how you can actually put the steps in place to enable true agility and resilience in your supply chain through our INTUIFLOW solution. The subsequent webinars are going to go into much more detail around this. So I'm going to try to just set the stage and tee up the key concepts here today. During the webinar, you'll all be on muted mode. This allows us to have the best audio quality for all attendees, but we are very interested in your questions. So please use the question and answer panel in the Zoom control panel that you've got to ask questions, and we'll cover those off at the end of the session. We are recording the session, so it will be available as a link for you to review and share with colleagues. And then finally, we will be sharing the presentation after we're done for your reference as well. So let's talk about the market realities. Some of you may have seen me present this chart before, but I think repetition is the source of all knowledge, so I continue to utilize it. This is a picture of U.S. manufacturing inventory turnover rates over the past 25 years, from the period of 1995 through to 2020. And as you can see, it's basically flat. We are turning inventory in U.S. manufacturing at the same rate as we were 25 years ago, which I find to be kind of a bit of a mind-numbing factoid. The idea that after all of the ERP investments that have been made and other supply chain software investments that companies have made over the past 25 years, that we're still trading at the same rate we were so many years ago. It just seems to be a bit of a, an indictment, if you will, of the actions that we've taken. Why haven't we gotten to a better place? There's roughly $1 trillion of inventory in U.S. manufacturing. And if, as you can imagine, if we could just release, say, 10, 15, 20% of that, how much economic horsepower that would generate, freeing up a couple $100 billion of working capital that could be deployed in other ways to help improve our business would be quite advantageous for us. So there's a need here for us to get to a better place. And it's also kind of a picture that illustrates that the conventional planning techniques that we've been using over the past years have really not yielded the kind of improvements that one would have expected. When you take it outside the kind of the statistics and look at kind of the story that I hear about as I travel around the world with clients and the like, the lament is very similar from one client to the next. They're struggling with the fact that their forecasts are inaccurate, especially when they get down to the item level. They may be able to get reasonably good numbers at the category level or a regional level or something like that, but for the most part, when you're looking at the item level forecasts, they're far off where they should be. People have been facing a substantial number of labor issues, staffing in their plants or in their distribution networks, on their planning teams and the like. It's been very, very difficult of late managing in that environment. And I think part of that is really a call for capabilities that are more easy to access, that people can get their arms around and get good value from, whereas in the past it's required so much effort and knowledge and expertise to be able to get value out of the solutions that are in the market. Constant firefighting, that's kind of been the nature of the beast for decades now. If you're in supply chain and you've been around for a while, God bless you, you've been through some tough times, I'm sure. But it's a challenging environment. You're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. When you don't have the right stock, you've got to be doing expedites and other actions to try to alleviate the situation. When you've got too much inventory, then finance is breathing down your neck. How come we're not in a better place? And it tends to be a stressful environment. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to make it calmer and more manageable. One of the other factors that's been a big influence, I think, on some of the results we've seen is item and SKU proliferation. The fact is people are offering more and more offerings into the market. As a result, there are more things to forecast. The pie doesn't get bigger by the number of SKUs you add. It tends to turn into a lot of items that are moving at a slower rate, which inherently become more and more difficult to forecast accurately. And I certainly think this is a challenge, especially when you look at the fact that the staffing levels in supply chain planning organizations and teams around the various companies tend to be on the decrease. So we're carrying more items that we have to manage, and we have less resources to manage them along the way. And then finally, a lot of workarounds and other techniques that people have deployed to try to get through their day and have some level of success. VUCA is a reality. The conditions are out there everywhere. We see them. We've learned a lot through the pandemic. And obviously, we would be best served if we could find a way to get to a more agile and resilient supply chain environment. So I thought it'd be useful to just take a look at the definitions of what agility and resilient actually are. Look these up. And Agile is defined as marked by the ready ability to move with quick and easy grace. Kind of the idea that whatever comes your way, you're able to adapt to it and deal with it. That it's not all premeditated, that you've got that flexibility built in such a manner that you can get a good result without all sorts of extra effort. On the other side, resilience is about the ability to withstand, recover from difficult conditions. That may be a case where we have a situation where there's a disruption in our supply chain and we need to take a corrective action. It could be a number of different factors, but suffice to say, we need to have the ability to recover from those situations and get to a better place. With that in mind, how can we take these definitions then and interpret and look at them within the context of some of the dimensions? What would it mean to have a more agile and resilient supply chain? And so this chart is just there to kind of say, what would that feel like? What would it look like? We would be able to adapt, I think, more quickly to changes in our market. We'd be able to respond, in essence, to whatever demand comes in a better way. And we wouldn't be in a situation where we're constantly having to take heroic actions to make those adjustments. We'd have flexibility to deal with different customer needs that may emerge and opportunities where we can have greater success as a company because we're able to capitalize on this agility that we have to capture market opportunities that may present themselves over time. If we do run into disruptions, we have the ability to recover more quickly. Maybe it's a plant failure, the machine goes down or a line goes down, or God forbid, you have a tragic event like a fire or some earthquake or something like that. But we have to have the ability to recover more quickly if we want to be in this agile and resilient kind of definition. And then I think part of all of this is as we go through our day, that we have the ability to see what really needs action. Not all priorities are created equal. Now, what we want to be able to do is focus on those actions that are going to do us the most good at the right point in time and the like. If we then say, okay, let's take these higher level thoughts of agility and resilience and apply them to different measures in our business. What would that actually look like? What would be the indicators of agility and resilience that we could measure and count on? Obviously, having very high service levels would be an indication that our supply chain is able to address those ever-changing needs that are out there. Responsiveness, that we would have short market quoted lead times, meaning we're able to offer a solution to a client faster than we were prior to this effort, right? We've become more responsive. That our inventory is more aligned to the true market demand. Instead of being in this chronic situation where we have too much of the wrong stuff, not enough of the right, we have much more preponderance of items that are aligned to what the right stocking level should be for the rates of demand that we're trying to support. Our production capacity should be used in a proper manner, meaning we're not burning production hours to create inventory that sits on the shelf for months. Rather, we are aligning the use of our production resources to what the market truly is demanding, and we're flexible. We have short production frozen windows and things like that. We're able to be more flexible with our production environment than we were before. Automation, I think, is a key piece of this as well. If we've built a proper supply chain foundation with the proper methods, the systems, and the support of it, our people ought to be able to rely on the system to provide the proper recommendations, to give them the guidance and the insight and the information in a manner that allows them to do the job without all this heroic effort that we've seen historically. And then, obviously, if we are incurring some staff turnover and other things like that, we've got the flexibility to maintain that level of support and service that we've traditionally had, in spite of the fact that our staffing may have changed due to the kind of conditions that we're all facing. So each of you might have a different definition of what these indicators would be for your environment, but I think the goal here is to try to identify those things that will do us the most good in creating a more agile, resilient supply chain environment. Now, as a backdrop, though, we should try to understand kind of why are we making this call for more agility and resilience, and talk about what are the core concepts that we're all living with in terms of supply chain planning today. And a lot of it is still founded on the MRP ideas that were generated back in the 70s by a guy named Joe Orlicki, who at the time was working with IBM, my former employer, who was obviously interested in trying to sell more computers into the manufacturing space, as predominantly at that time, it was primarily finance and accounting type applications that were really the primary use of computing. Joe developed the MRP logic in the early 70s. It's been published. It became the universal standard, and it's based on kind of the following assumptions: that based on your forecast, if you tell me what the demand will be, it will do the job of backward scheduling what you need to buy, then manufacture or assemble, package and distribute to meet that forecasted demand, right? And that's kind of the foundation that we all stand on and have worked with for decades now in terms of supply chain planning in the greater context, right? Yes, there are lean, there are other pull techniques out there, but the more widely deployed method is clearly MRP, and it's kind of been the backbone for so many years. But there's some critical assumptions in here, and we have to really think about how well do they really align to this idea of agility and resilience. First, and most foundationally, that the forecast is accurate, right? That demand is known. And how much can we really trust that? What it's saying is that we have to start all these activities now because we need the time to be able to create the goods and services that we're taking into the market. And so if we don't start planning ahead and using a forecast well out into the future, we'll never be able to service the market on time. So this idea of dependence on forecasting is quite at the foundation of how current supply chain planning processes work. And I think we can all agree that there's a lot of risk in that there is opportunities for misalignments because the forecasts aren't going to be accurate for all those reasons we've already discussed. The other assumption underlying MRP is that there's not going to be any variation. And so in both of these statements, demand is known, there will be no variation. We are basically saying that volatility will not happen, right? We're planning in a manner that we believe is going to give us the exact right answer, that we know what will happen in the future. And I think part of this, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes, is that organizations, if they truly want to become agile and resilient in their supply chains, they need to accept the fact that there will be uncertainty, and instead focus their time and attention on building in the ability to flex and be agile and nimble and resilient, given the fact that if we wave the white flag and we say we really don't know exactly what's going to happen, our consensus demand plan will not be really lined up correctly, then maybe we'll put our time and attention into building in that support and that flexibility into our business so that we're in a better place. So we want to be able to move with quick and easy grace. We want to have this resilience. We have to embrace this idea, the certainty of an uncertain future. If we accept that and we understand the importance of that, then I think we're going to look at solving the problem in a different way. And we have to open our eyes and our minds to do that, because if we continue to follow the same path we've been doing, we're going to get the same results we've been getting. So how do we get there? There's a concept in the market now called the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model. This has been promoted and supported by the Demand-Driven Institute. And it's foundationally built on the idea of, we have to build adaptability into our business, agility and resilience by definition. It has two foundational concepts that I think are critical here to understand. First, that from an operational standpoint, meaning how do we operate on a day-to-day basis, operating our production processes, the material planning and all that, that to the degree we can pace to the actual demand in the market, we stand to be in a better place, because by definition, we have removed the issue of the inaccurate forecasts and plans that we've already tried to establish. We have proven time and again through deployment of clients on demand-driven MRP and demand-driven capacity scheduling that we can get them to better on-time and full order fill rates with lower working capital and inventory balances in a much more stable and balanced environment. So on the left side of the chart, it's all about pacing to real demand in the market. And I think by definition, that means you're more agile. It's not about planning well into the future, which is a prescriptive, predictive kind of an approach. It's more about building stock positions, how you use your production scheduling in a flexible way to be able to time activities based directly off of the actual demand on the market. On the right side, we all know that every business is going to evolve. You're going to enter new markets, you're going to change strategies, things will happen over time. And so you have to have this focus on a forecast, or better, a range of forecasts that try to describe what are the possible scenarios we should be planning for. And then utilizing demand-driven S&OP as the bridge to bring those two together. It's not about planning to the future. It's about using the future in an understanding of the possibilities it may represent, those uncertain different scenarios that we may encounter, to configure our model. I'm going to put my pointer on here if I can to make this a little easier for you to follow along with what I'm saying. The more we can configure our model in a manner to deal with a range of scenarios, the better off we're going to be. Because if our model has been designed from the get-go to be flexible and adaptive, we are going to be absolutely more agile. That can have to do with things like your stock buffers, meaning how much inventory you hold and how you hold them to deal with the variations that they encounter, the rates of demand that they're going to experience, things of that nature. As well on the production side, to have a concept like time and capacity buffers to give you the ability to protect for the variation that inevitably finds its way into production environments, because it becomes part of that problem statement that you're trying to manage up till now. The better you can make yourself flexible in those environments, the more agile and resilient you'll be. And then as you learn over time, through variance analysis and monitoring, what actually happened versus what we thought would happen, how did we respond, what actions could we have taken, we start to build a improvement loop here, a continuous improvement loop here, where we continue to update our models to reflect the upcoming conditions we expect to deal with, as well as learning from how we've behaved in the past and where those opportunities are for moving forward. So the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model is all about agility and resilience. And we can then work from here to look at, okay, if this is what we're trying to aspire to, how do we make changes in our material planning environment, our production scheduling environment? How does S&OP change so that we can be in a better place and truly make some headway on this key priority? So we're going to take a few minutes now and go through each of the kind of the key functional areas and just tease out some of the concepts. The follow-on webinars that we'll be having over the next few weeks are going to bring these to much more life and depth. So I'm not trying to cover all that waterfront here, just to try to give you an idea of, if I'm thinking of material planning, what would make me more agile and resilient, we would think the following things. One, we're pacing our materials to the true demand that's out there in the market. That is about utilizing a true pull-based concept, a demand-driven concept, to manage our material replenishments and things of that nature. When we establish stock buffers, like a DDMRP buffer, we gain a critical advantage as well of compressing our lead times. The concept of a decoupled lead time in DDMRP is very, very critical to us being able to shorten our response windows to our markets that we're serving. So if I can pace to the actual demand through the benefit of stock buffers, I also gain this other strategic advantage of compressing my response time, those decoupled lead times, which give us a competitive advantage, gives us more flexibility, and they also have further benefit of allowing us to carry less working capital while at the same time reducing our lead times to the market, which is something that most people don't really have a strategy for. They're also designed to deal with variation. These stock buffers, and with the advancements we've made with our AI and machine learning based pattern recognition for demand patterns, we're able to give you basically the safety settings you need to be in a position to ensure that the stock will always be available. If that material is always available in the appropriate balances, then we are absolutely going to pace to the real demand in the market, and we're going to gain this other advantage of the decoupled lead times that we've talked about. So it's about strategically deploying DDMRP buffers. It's not about everywhere. It's got to be critically understood here that this is not a strategy where it's a silver bullet, fixes everything. Many, many use cases out there, too numerous to mention, where stock buffers do not make sense. So we're not saying you apply that universally, but where you can, it does help improve your agility in your company. On the scheduling and execution side, what we want to aspire to is shortening our frozen windows. The shorter we make those, the more flexible we are by definition, because we're not trying to lock everything down for 4 weeks out into the future. We're now saying that we can respond more quickly if in fact a change happens in the market that requires a new, production run that we weren't anticipating. If we can keep our production windows short, we give ourselves more flexibility. We will be perceived in the market that we're serving as a much more flexible and responsive vendor, and that's going to improve our prospects on the long term. We want to make sure we're utilizing production capacity where it is most required. And there is an incredibly important link between the material planning signals we have with what should be prioritizing the production work orders that are needed. Because the more we can harmonize the link between those two, the more effective we will be in utilizing our production resources for those actions that are going to most help us out in the marketplace. As I mentioned, the concept of time and capacity buffers, and these will come out in more depth in the follow-on webinar around production scheduling. They're there to help us manage the variation, to improve our resilience, and to put us in a better place where we can ride the ups and downs that inevitably happen in a production environment. Time and capacity buffers protect our on-time, promise dates, our due dates to the market. but they also give us, in the capacity buffer side, the ability to make up for perhaps lost time if there are issues like a machine breakdown and other things that happen in our environment that we need to counter. So demand-driven capacity scheduling, to me, is another key part of the foundation that you want to establish to give yourself and move yourself toward a more agile environment. From a sales and operations planning, I think this is one, there's a fundamental break with the convention. Convention says we want to get a consensus demand plan. We want everyone's input on what that demand plan is going to be, because we're going to line up all of our supply plans to meet that demand plan we've crafted. Sounds very logical, all makes sense. It's all very much aligned to the MRP way of thinking. And in our opinion, it's really not the right way to go. Instead of taking all that time and effort to get everybody to agree to a demand plan that automatically will be missed, why aren't we using that time and energy to look at how do we build agility into our environment? The goal of that process should be to give us the capability to respond to whatever the market brings us, and allows us to capitalize on those in a flexible, resilient, agile kind of way. In this context, demand planning changes. Demand planning becomes more about scenarios and looking at a range of cases so that we know where the inflection points are in those demand patterns that we may experience, and we can prepare ourselves for that. Whether it's advising suppliers that there may be some upside potential, or whether it's changing our production thinking, perhaps freeing up some production capacity in some areas that are not being optimally used now, perhaps making some investments here or there because it'll give us that responsiveness that we're looking for. But if we really use S&OP as the way to build that agility and resilience, and I think in a lot of ways it's the most critical first step down this path, now we're going to be in a better place to be able to respond to those changes that we should be able to expect. I think it's about managing exceptions, right? Not celestial alignment. What I mean by that is kind of what we did at IBM when I was there. You know, we kind of got everybody together. We worked hard on getting all these plans lined up and laid out and documented in such a way that really is a wasted effort, because a lot of times you're focusing on things that are not really that relevant. If we can focus S&OP to give us a lighter weight effort, but a lot more value from the process on where the exceptions are, things like where we may have inventory ruptures, where we may have exposures from a rough cut capacity planning standpoint. There's a range of areas that we can analyze and understand. If we use exception management, we're going to be focusing our time and attention where it's going to get us the most good. And then finally, demand planning. It's really kind of the part of the core process of S&OP, but it's all about using demand planning to develop ranges of forecasts to facilitate collaboration across the organization. And obviously, we want to move away from this idea of demand smoothing and algorithms that try to take some of the noise out of the data. It's actually the noise in the data that we need to be prepared for, right? If we're able to deal with noise, with the spikes in orders or the other scenarios that may emerge, we're going to be in a much more agile and resilient environment. We're going to be far better prepared to deal with those kind of scenarios if and when they come along. So our solution is a platform called INTUIFLOW, and it's an integrated business planning platform really built around these foundational ideas of demand-driven concepts, those concepts that are absolutely central to true agility and resilience in supply chain. They focus on pacing activities to the real demand in the market. That's what the demand-driven operating model does for us. It allows us to do that both on a material planning side as well as from a scheduling and execution standpoint. The S&OP process is then used not to align to a consensus demand plan, but rather to use those insights we gained from DDS and OP to help improve the model, address better time and capacity buffers, better material buffers, make changes if and where needed to deal with that. And then obviously too, learning from our past experiences to gain better and better traction on how we build that flexibility into our model going forward. And this journey, I think, can bear a lot of fruit and put companies in a far better place than they've been to. Our platform covers kind of the core anchor points of integrated business planning from the standpoint of demand planning, material and inventory planning, distribution, production, scheduling, and execution, as well as S&OP. And you'll learn more about each of these areas as we go through the subsequent webinars in our series. What we think are differentiators, first of all, we are absolutely driven by the idea that the systems today in the market require way too much expertise to get value from. In other words, that the complexities that y'all face in your supply chain environments have kind of turned themselves into complex software that's very difficult for users to utilize. So the more automation, the more visibility we can provide to you such that you can gain greater trust in the system, the better a position we put you in. You know, people have more things to manage than they used to. We've got lower levels of staffing headcount in supply chain planning. So we have to find a way to convert this to a better place, make it intuitive. The idea of INTUIFLOW, the idea of that brand was, you know, the idea we want our supply chains to flow efficiently, and we want to make our solutions intuitive and easier to use. We also recognize that it's not just about demand-driven planning. There are times where you're going to need to plan to forecast. You've got to be able to support those different stories. So our platform supports all of those kind of environments. Fast time to value. You know, the idea should be that needle should move. You know, that inventory turns should be able to improve rather quickly. We've had a great deal of success on that front with our clients to date, and we continue with a deep passion around that. And that's all about creating proven results, you know, delivering the value that you should have always gotten from your software, and in a way that is easy to achieve and doesn't require heroic efforts to gain. Part of that process that we offer is simulations that allow us to work with you to show you, given your demand patterns, what you've experienced, how you can create better agility and resilience, what the cash benefits on that can be in terms of reduced working capital, improved on-time order fill rates, and other factors along those lines. This is my story, and I've used this many times. To me, software today in the supply chain arena feels too much like we're the astronauts in the Apollo space capsule, where literally the astronauts were part of the computer. Computers weren't very good back in the 70s. Batteries weren't very good, nothing like what we have today. And the brave men that went up in those capsules, you know, were the best of the best of the best, heavily trained. You know, the right stuff was the term that was often used to them, because they had to flip those switches, turn those knobs, all those things to get to the moon and back safely. And it was not an insignificant feat that they were able to accomplish. But if SpaceX can send civilians into outer space now for 3 or 4 day journeys with cool looking spacesuits and iPads on an automated journey driven by huge benefits of technology, then why can't we get to a similar place where software that you're using to create agility and resilience in your supply chain is more user-friendly, achievable, adaptable, et cetera, to make that your journey a lot more effective and productive. We're proud to have clients all around the world. We're on 6 continents now. We've been a leader in the demand-driven movement, but we really see that success as just kind of the starting point. It's foundational in the sense that it brings us the ability to deliver true agility and resilience in a better way, based on fresh ideas that I think are truly going to be more productive for users to follow than kind of the conventional planning techniques of the past. And obviously quite proud of the success our clients have had around the world. It's all about this quest. We're trying to become more adaptive, more responsive, the ability to recover more quickly, and the ability to give our users a platform and a process that they can follow and agree with and trust, so that they can use more automation, focus their time and energy on those edge cases and those other situations that really do require a human intervention versus, spending their time checking the math of the system. That to me is a waste of time and effort. We should be in a much, much better place. If SpaceX and the space industry can make these kind of advancements, then why can't we from a supply chain planning community get far better benefit out of the solutions that we're working with and be more productive going forward? Finally, before we wrap up, these are the following webinars. They're visible on our website. I think as you've registered, you may have already been signed up for the other sessions. They're about 2 weeks apart as we go forward. The next event will be on material planning, a drill down on how do you really create agility from a material planning standpoint. It's about those how-tos. Then we'll cover sales and operations planning on July 26th and wrap it all up with production scheduling in the August 9th webinar. So with that, let's stop here and we'll take a break and see if there's questions. Are there any questions out there to answer?
We do have one, Eric. So the question is, what changes are needed in sales and operations planning to improve agility?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a cultural change that's needed there, where companies have really tried to do the hard efforts of consensus planning around demand and supply. I think it would take some education of your stakeholders to help them understand that there's a different way to go after this and that we should focus instead on building flexibility and agility. And the way to do that is not to just lock in on one consensus demand plan, one consensus supply plan. It's about looking at a range of scenarios. So I think from the changes standpoint, I think there would need to be some stakeholder awareness created. We've done some workshops with clients and are very willing to do this, to do this kind of a agility and resilience workshop as a way of doing that. As I mentioned earlier, kind of teeing that up with shifting your thinking around S&OP to this more focusing on building flexibility into our model as its priority versus celestial alignment, as I call it. Those would be the things that I would really recommend we move towards.
Okay. There is another one that says, does creating more agility require investing in more production capacity?
I think that would be kind of the default expectation for most people, that the only way I can build more flexibility in my production environment is to have more capacity, meaning more unutilized resources. The convention has obviously always been to maximize the utilization of all your resources. There's some flaws in that thinking that then create constraints. So I would say it's this way, that it's not a given that you will need to buy more capacity, more production capability. It's often the case that if you really adopt the demand-driven philosophies, that you free up capacity and resources that are being utilized solely because they're there. And someone believes that if I put work against those machines or resources, I reduce my costs because my cost per unit goes down. But all I'm doing is creating inventory of items that I'm not going to utilize, right? So if you adopt the demand-driven philosophies, you'll find some free capacity that's already there that's not being well utilized. It's being overutilizing on things that don't need to be done. There will certainly be examples, though, perhaps on your constraint type resources where buying additional capacity will do you a good because it'll give you more flexibility and agility. But it's not a given. I would not go into it with the thought that by definition, more agility means more production resources in aggregate. I think it's going to depend a lot on your environment, where there are opportunities to save, because you're not going to be spending resources, time on things that don't need to be done. But there will, I'm sure, be examples where it's really going to be about building more capacity.
Mm-hmm. All right, there is another one on the topic of forecasting. It says, how does forecasting change in the adaptive enterprise?
forecasting changes in the sense that we want to not try to go down the path of a consensus plan. We want to look at a range of scenarios. We want to look for the things that would really cause ruptures or cause substantial challenges, and make sure that we see those ahead of time so that we're more able to deal with that. So I think demand planning is still vitally important. I think I would advocate that you do spend, if you're going to spend 100 hours on it, spending 100 hours on one plan, one demand plan. I would spend 33 hours on 3 different plans each, right? And spend my 100 hours developing a range of scenarios that I can then use to test and build in that agility and resilience that we're looking for.
All right, we have another one who says, who is the kingpin in implementing DDMRP in a company?
Great question. We've seen everyone from, first line managers advocate and build the momentum to deploy DDMRP in a client. And we've also seen very senior executives who capture the vision and understand the nuance and the differences and drive it from a change in that regard. I do think it's critical to have executive level support. So typically the chief supply chain executive or officer, maybe VP of operations, depending on the titles that you're using in the organization. You need someone with a strong vision and a commitment to the change. It will absolutely deliver results when properly applied. But you want someone with senior enough stature in the organization and clout to be able to do that. We can always get the momentum going at a plant level and then build on that momentum, as many of our global clients have done. They were able to do successful pilots and then convert that into a company-wide transformational effort. But I think at the end of the day, you're still going to need a senior executive who can really help carry the day on that front.
All right, now we have another question on the topic of AI. So it says, how does artificial intelligence apply on making a better, on improving agility and resilience with the demand-driven adaptive enterprise model?
Yeah, I could go on quite a bit about this, but I'll try to summarize it this way. The statistical methods for determining variability and safety stock settings, this is the most kind of easy example to get your head around. There's lots of formulas out there with z-scores and all sorts of things that then calculate what a target safety stock level should be. We have seen, though, and it's a lot done through something called a coefficient of variation, which is the standard deviation of demand divided by the average. That's a flawed premise. That it works reasonably well, but there's a lot of improvement beyond that, because items with the same coefficient of variation will behave very differently. And my metaphor for this one is the music app Shazam on your phone, where a song can be playing in a restaurant. You click the button. Within a few seconds, no matter what part of the song is playing, it'll identify the artist, the song name, the album, whatever, by taking a sound wave out of the air, matching it to a digital impression, and then coming back with a result. We have found through our AI ML work that we can do a much better job at generating appropriate red zones through pattern recognition versus statistical analysis. And so we have a new feature coming out called Autopilot that allows us to create red zones based on the actual shape of the demand that your items experience. And it will evolve that setting over time based on changes in those demand patterns. Kind of in a Shazam-like functionality. We've got a patent for this. We are so excited to be bringing this out. These AI ML-based red zones then give users greater confidence that the settings that they have are accurate, that they will not stock out if they utilize these, and at the same time, they're not going to overcommit on inventory. So AI ML, I think, is absolutely a key technology. It's got to be properly applied. But if I take this red zone example, if I've covered my variation correctly, that my users can have more confidence and they can pace their replenishment orders based on actual demand. By definition, I've taken a huge step forward in becoming more agile and resilient. Resilient because I'm dealing with the right variation parameters or attributes that those items experience. Agile, because I'm pacing to where the real demand is that comes in on a daily basis and getting to a much, much better place that way. Any
right.
further?
Yeah, here's another one. What do you consider as conventional planning methods? More specifically, how does the concept of DDMRP blend with traditional lean companies using physical Kanban assignments?
So to me, conventional planning is MRP-based planning. You know, it's the idea that we're going to develop a demand plan. We are going to then backward schedule all the activities that need to be bought, manufactured, distributed to meet that demand. That's what I think of as conventional planning. I think of lean as a true demand-driven approach. It's a pull-based concept. If you know Kanban's loop sizing formulas and the like, there is a corollary between the dimensions in a Kanban sizing formula and the elements in a DDMRP buffer. So they are very, very, very similar in the way they're constructed, with the one nuance is that I think DDMRP buffer logic does a better job, especially like with the AI/ML I've just discussed, at managing the variation dimension. The variation dimension doesn't really factor that well into a typical Kanban loop sizing algorithm, but very, very harmonious from that standpoint, and in line from that aspect.
All right, and the last question we have is, what is the greatest obstacle during an implementation? Is it system or people?
That's a great one. The technical part of putting a system together, deploying INTUIFLOW, for example, is not that challenging at all. And I think there are large cadres of users who adopt very, very readily. I do think, though, there is a lot of built-in inertia to overcome with those that are wed to the conventional ways of planning, to forecast, to whatever. And so I think all of that can be overcome. We've done it time and time and time again, but I think that it's about the people change. I think at the end of the day, all of this is about people. If we can deliver software in such a manner that our users are more confident, that the system can be trusted, instead of feeling today in a typical MRP environment where they are a slave to the MRP system because it's such a quest to keep all the data sorted and all that stuff, I think there's a huge gain that can be achieved there. So I think at the end of the day, it's a people opportunity, it's a people challenge, far more than it is systems. I think the capabilities and the feedback we've gotten from our clients on our solution, the usability of it, the intuitiveness of it, are a good step. I don't think we're anywhere near Dragon Capsule yet. I continue to push our team to find ways to make it more and more seamless and user-friendly and the like. But I think at the end of the day, if we focus on that user story and understand the role that the people are playing and the challenge that they have fighting with today's systems, then we will craft capabilities for them that will make it far easier to make these kind of changes that we're talking about. Okay. Any others?
The last one.
Okay. Well, look, thanks everyone for your time and attention today. I do believe that agility and resilience are the priorities. There is absolutely a call to action here that we've got to move in this direction. I'm a staunch believer that by definition means you have to become more demand driven. And the techniques that we'll be illustrating in the coming webinars should give you some confidence that there's a path to get there. A lot of what I've seen from some of our competitors in the market around supply chain software is they tell you, get agile and get resilient. And, the first thing is make your forecast more accurate. By definition, that's not the right answer. We have to focus on building the flexibility into our business. When we do that, good things are going to happen. So with that, we'll wrap up for today. Thanks so much, everyone. Want to wish you the best. Please attend the other sessions. Again, recording will be available from this session, as well as the slides that we presented. And with that, we'll close and wish you all the best on your own demand-driven journey. Thanks, everyone.